Angle from Washington tonight. We have a big show on tap. Tucker Carlson's going to be here at 10 o'clock, no less. Senator John Kennedy, the head of the Chicago Police Union, all here in moments. But first, the coming GOP tsunami. That's the focus of tonight's Angle. All right, first the bad news. Let's start out with the bad news. We have at least 18 spineless, fiscally unsound Republicans in the U.S. Senate who just gave Joe Biden a much-needed win on infrastructure. It's a bill filled with junk that we don't need and can't afford. Says no fiscal or social conservative should have ever supported this. Senator John Kennedy, he's so torqued off by what his colleagues did, including, by the way, the Louisiana junior senator colleague, Bill Cassidy, that he wanted to come on tonight. So, again, he's going to be with us shortly. But there's a heck of a lot of good news out there, too. Namely, Democrats are poised for a massive rout next year. Now, Axios is reporting that inflation, rising crime, and the border surge are positioning Republicans for even bigger midterm gains than they'd imagined just months ago. And let's not forget Biden's handling of COVID. He allowed the peasants to celebrate July 4th, but that was short-lived. One early salvation for Democrats, their handling of the coronavirus pandemic, is turning into a liability as the Delta variant threatens school reopenings, a return to mask mandates, and a new wave of shutdowns. So now, under Biden, it's back to doom and gloom 24/7.
You should assume that we're going to see pediatric intensive care units all across the South completely overwhelmed. And something, even a possibility of small tent cities of sick adolescents and kids.
Oh, those tent cities are at the border. And, of course, there's always another variant lurking in the shadows. You get a whole alphabet of variants, and they'll prevent us from ever going back to normal.
If you give the virus a chance to continue to change, you're leading to a vulnerability that we might get a worse variant, and then that will impact not only the unvaccinated, that will impact the vaccinated, because that variant could evade the protection of the vaccine.
In other words, the 70% vaccine target that Biden gave us, that was a lie. Now it seems to mean that the guys in the white coats who are really controlling policy, they're not going to be satisfied unless, I don't know, 105% of Americans get the vaccine. Oh, and then the booster shots forever. Now, late last year, the Angle sounded the alarm about how the Democrats would try to keep the COVID hysteria going into the fall of this year, on into the midterms. Well, when we said that, we were laughed at. But here we are. People are again wearing masks. I saw this today. Walking outside alone, wearing masks, driving alone, in their own vehicles, no less. It is truly sick. Now, most sane Americans are fed up with all of it. They're looking at the bottom line, and their money isn't going as far. So when he's private jetting his way to Martha's Vineyard, John Kerry's not affected by skyrocketing gas prices. But most working Americans are. Now, across the country, gas is up nearly 30% from a year ago. That's nearly $1 per gallon. Do the math. That's Biden taking money out of your pocket every time you buy anything, every time you go to the store. It's robbery via bad policy. And it's not just COVID and rising cost of goods and services that are going to be the Democrats' political demise next year. It's also our wide open southern border and the crime wave that is gripping the nation after a year of Democrat lockdowns and calls to defund the police. Now, if you had a choice, think about this, between starting a family or opening a business right now, if you're doing one of those things right now, and you could go to either Chicago or, let's say, Nashville, which would you choose? Now, if you chose Chicago, get ready for weekend after weekend of death and destruction. 2 police officers shot this weekend, 1 killed. More on more on her life, and we're going to talk about her later on in the program. Police are describing all of this at a breaking point. People are just at their wits' end. Alderman Matt O'Shea telling the Chicago Sun-Times, our police officers have been under siege, underappreciated, and thrown under the bus for the last year and a half. They feel that leadership across the country, across the city, do not have their back. But don't worry, because the stomach-churning rise in crime, I'm sure, is going to improve now that Biden is essentially opening our border to anyone who wants to come in from any country on earth. Whether they come for benefits or whether they come to commit crime, we know for sure many are also bringing in COVID. Yet one of the Democrats' cleanup women over at CNN sees this whole thing is just another GOP hoax.
No evidence that they're responsible for the COVID surge in U.S. communities. It is the centuries-old trope of demonizing foreign people as diseased. These conservative voices know that. They're the vectors here, infecting Americans they profess to care about with misinformation.
Ooh, vector, big word. Now, one minor question. Does she think that the Border Patrol is in on the hoax too? Because this is their numbers. 18% of migrant families leaving Border Patrol custody tested positive for COVID, document says. In addition, over 25% of migrants recently scheduled for some expedited deportation flights tested positive, said a document obtained by NBC News, a document from Border Patrol. So your kids have to be masked up in many places across the country now for 7 hours a day when they're in school, but migrants can waltz right in? Well, the squad and Bernie Sanders, they know the Democrats are in trouble. So does the White House. They know this. So they're going to go ramming through as many socialist goodies into their next monster bill as possible. I'm talking, of course, about that $3.5 trillion so-called reconciliation bill that the GOP Gang of 18 made possible. It's going to ensure that we lose more of the country we love. Here's just a partial list. Amnesty, a civilian climate corps, climate research, racial justice and health investments. You see the numbers there, it's huge. Paid family medical leave, universal pre-K, tuition-free community college, and the all-important electrifying the federal vehicle fleet. Okay. Massive tax hikes are going to pay for some of this, and then, of course, we're going to have huge borrowing as well. And we all know it's going to be cronyism, Solyndra style, waste, fraud, and abuse that's going to accompany any spending of this magnitude. Nevertheless, though, Chuck Schumer feels the climate is just right.
The budget reconciliation bill will do more to combat climate change than any legislation ever in the history of the Senate. That is a promise.
We know this because climate was mentioned 9 times in the instructions to the Senate committees. What the Democrats have done to America in 6.5 months is breathtaking. You have to give them credit for, pushing it as fast as they did. They're not wasting any time. They've whipped up a poisonous left-wing stew of job-killing, race-baiting, sovereignty-destroying, business-suffocating, and inflation-creating ingredients. Only, of course, to then exempt themselves from the same rules that they demand the unsophisticated American. Or does Fauci now think really bad dancing in a crowd somehow protects you from the Delta variant? I guess Obama's okay. It's not just time to kick them out of the kitchen. We need a storm of common sense and personal responsibility to wash them out of Washington for good. And that's the angle. All right, joining me now, former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor Ari Fleischer, and Molly Hemingway, senior editor of The Federalist and Fox News contributor. Molly, no one's done a better job of, I think, igniting grassroots opposition than the Democrats themselves. But this GOP gift to Biden on so-called infrastructure itself was breathtaking.
It is breathtaking, and I know a lot of Republicans are eager to see what happens in the midterm elections because of how unpopular these Democratic policy proposals are, whether they're at the border or inflation or the growing crime surge. But Republicans need to understand that voters are looking for someone who's actually going to fight the Democrats on these things. When Democrats have power, they use their power. When Republicans have power, they tend not to use their power so much. And even when they're out of power, they don't seem to fight quite as much as their voters would like them to be doing. And these 17 senators who are voting for this bloated infrastructure package, which is leading to an even worse spending bill that was going to cause problems with inflation, these are not what Republican voters are looking for.
Ari, I want to talk about what the Democrats are offering here by way of specifics in this new reconciliation bill that they've now married together, which is what a lot of us were saying was going to happen, to the infrastructure bill. So this is an exchange on MSNBC today with Senator Tim Kaine, who kind of, gave up the ghost on what's happening. Watch.
We learned a new term today, talking about lawful permanent status for qualified immigrants. Who would be included there?
That is something that the Judiciary Committee will work on. They will try to craft a detailed description of what that means that can satisfy all 50 Democrats. We're not expecting any Republican votes on this. So it has to be something that every Democrat will agree to.
Ari, are Americans going to accept this?
Oh, no. I mean, you can see another Tea Party rebellion brewing right here. And Laura, one of the things you have to do here is it's not just these individual spending bills. You have to add them up because we, the people, pay for them combined. So how much has Joe Biden proposed to spend? It is $6.5 trillion additional new dollars on top of the existing spending that the government does. And just to put that $6.5 trillion, which is the cost of the 3 reconciliation bills, in context, in 2019, the total government spending was $4.4 trillion. This is now $6.5 trillion additional new spending on top of all the existing spending the government does. There's never been a blowout this big in government spending. Never. And this is what Joe Biden wants to do, almost all of it focused on redistribution of income. Of course, the answer should be no.
Molly, tonight on CNN, Chuck Schumer's nightmare is a potential challenge from the left to his longstanding tenure in the U.S. Senate. Well, AOC still holding out. Watch.
Are you going to challenge Senator Schumer in a primary race?
I do not look at things and I do not set my course position decisions based on what I think our people need and my community needs. And so I'm not commenting on that.
Molly, they're terrified of her. They're positively terrified of her.
Well, I think they should be terrified of her. She's been a very effective member. She came in representing a fairly small contingent that continues to grow and really set the policy of the Democratic Party. Throughout the 2020 election, we were told that the people who were running were moderates and that they would restore to the United States some wonderful situation. Instead, whether it's at the presidential level, the Senate, or the House, we are seeing absolutely radical policies that are alarming so many people. They are very much in favor with that wing of the Democratic Party that is in control, and they are setting policies. And you saw it even with President Biden saying that even though he knew it was unconstitutional, he was extending the eviction moratorium because that was one of the things that AOC and her friends had wanted to have in place. This is very much a threat to rule of law. It's a threat. It's a war on small businesses. The Democratic Party is very much happy with big businesses, but the small businesses, they are going to war against them.
Yeah, she's the thought leader of the party now, for sure. Molly and Ari, great to see you both. And moments again, Chuck Schumer took to the Senate floor for a victory lap with a twist.
We have come to an agreement for final passage of the bipartisan infrastructure proposal. As we move forward, we're proceeding on both tracks, the track of the bipartisan infrastructure proposal and the track of the budget resolution with reconciliation instructions.
Just what Nancy and AOC wanted. But wait, what he said, that double track thing, it's impossible because just last week, so-called Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana told me something very different.
We think this makes that behemoth less likely to pass. And somehow you are trying, if I may, Laura, we make that bill less likely to pass. But if we sink this bill and you marry them together, it's more likely to pass.
Okay.
That's just what simple logic tells you.
Who was right and who was wrong? Joining me now with a final warning is Louisiana Senator John Kennedy, who serves on the Senate Budget Committee, and he voted properly on this particular so-called infrastructure bill. Senator, your message tonight to your 18 or so colleagues who took this path to help Biden, threw him a lifeline, and now we see what's going on, going to $3.5 trillion now.
Well, I can just share with you my perspective, Laura. Early on, I was a likely yes on this bill. I mean, you know, who's not for infrastructure? I'm for children and prosperity, too. But then I got a copy of the bill, and I realized pretty quickly that if you look up stupid stuff in the dictionary, there's a picture of this bill. They told us it was a real infrastructure bill. It's not. Only 23% of the bill is real infrastructure. The rest is Green New Deal and welfare. They told us the bill was paid for. It isn't. We're going to have to borrow maybe up to $400 billion to pay for it. They told us there were no tax increases. There are. My state's going to have to pay $1.3 billion in new taxes on our petrochemical industry. They told us, as you pointed out, that the Democrats were really wary of this bill, and that it would, if we passed this bill, it would make it harder for them to pass their $5 trillion tax and spending binge reconciliation bill. Well, if that's true, how come every Democrat voted for this infrastructure bill? And finally, they told us that it's not going to add to inflation, but it will.
So what happened with your 18 colleagues? I went through that list, and maybe with the exception of a couple, Senator, I would say it was pretty much the same people who wanted Jeb Bush to be the nominee in 2016. It was kind of like a Venn diagram. It was mostly Jeb Bush people, which is fine. But Mitt Romney was actually arguing that this thing would save $500 billion. So you're saying this, the CBO agrees with you, but they're arguing numbers that are just false. What is that going to do to the credibility of the Republican Party on fiscal responsibility going forward, sir?
Well, I don't know why it passed with 60 plus votes. I don't know, day drinking maybe. All I know is, for example, inflation alone, which is a horrible tax on middle America. They told us, oh, this isn't going to add to inflation, but it is. I mean, I don't like to brag about all the expensive places I've been, but earlier today I went to the gas station. This bill's going to make it worse. It's going to make it worse for groceries, too. And look, I'm for infrastructure. I'm just not for infrastructure at any cost. I'm for infrastructure. I'm not for infrastructure no matter what. And we're going into a fight now with the Democrats over raising the debt ceiling. And
raising
the
taxes.
Argument,
raising taxes, too.
And taxes. And the argument that I'd like to make is, which I can make, Senator Schumer, this debt is yours. This debt is yours. But the truth of the matter is that on this last bill, the infrastructure bill, this debt belongs to both Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, well, Senator, first of all, we appreciate your common sense approach to this. It's common sense. It's facts versus fiction, and we appreciate that. The Republicans gave Joe Biden a lifeline, and I can't tell you how angry so many people are out there about that one fact. It's fraudulent and it's false, and all 18 think they're going to skate for 6 years. They're not. People are going to have a long memory about this. Senator, thank you. Thank you for being here. And a whipped-up mob tried to ruin a man's life after something they thought he said at a major league. Microphones from the Florida telecast picked up a fan, his voice. Sounded like he was yelling the N-word as Marlins player Lewis Brinson's was batting. The reaction from the team was swift. The Colorado Rockies are disgusted. The Rockies have zero tolerance for any form of racism. Any fan using derogatory language of any kind will be ejected and banned from Coors Field. The keyboard warriors went even further MLB contributor Craig Mish tweeting, Rockies need to find this bastard and do bad things to him. USA Today's sweetheart Bob Nightingale tweeted, disgusting, please find him, and followed that up with, and put him in jail without the right to ever attend a sporting event, let alone anything else. Punish him, jail him, cast him out of society. But what was actually said? Here's the video. It turns out it was a grandfather yelling the word dinger, the name of the Rockies' dinosaur mascot, in an attempt, I guess, to get a photo with his family. The grandfather spoke to a local reporter saying that he was devastated by the accusations. But USA Today's Bob Nightingale doesn't care. He offered no mea culpa to the man and attempting to ruin his life, but he did say this. After personally seeing the racism family, friends endure every damn day, it was too easy to believe it happened again. Oh, that's so nice. Joining me now, Tucker Carlson, host of Tucker Carlson Tonight, host of the streaming shows on Fox Nation, Tucker Carlson Originals, Tucker Carlson Today. Is there any other shows you want to announce right now, Tucker?
No.
And author of the brand new book, The Long Slide. There he is on the cover. I just tweeted it out, Tucker, by the way.
Oh, you're nice. Thank you.
Congrats on the book. Your neck is not that thin, by the way. It's not at all.
No, it's definitely not. What a shocking story you just told. I bet if you asked Bob Nightingale, hey, Bob, are you for lynching? He would say, well, of course not. All good people. But then why do they participate effectively in the kind of crazed mob behavior that leads to it? I mean, I think, honestly, they don't respond that way when they see someone getting shot to death on the street in Chicago or New York. I mean, social media have turned people crazy. I think it's important to note that. All the behavior you just described is the product of an entire society whose chattering class spends all day on Twitter, getting crazier and crazier and more removed from reality and people. Social media really have driven awful. America to a bad place.
Now, and your book title is The Long Slide, and I always think of what my mother would say about what's happened to so much of society. And there are obviously great people doing amazing things, selfless things all over the world. But the slide of society, and one thing in your book, and we have a lot of other stuff to get to, but one thing in your book that really struck home to me is how now everything has to be so safe for kids. Yeah. And even with the current debate, some of that, kind of seeps into it. But from go-karts to walking around in bubble wrap and double masking, and you write about how life used to be fun. You could actually have fun. Now it's never can get hurt.
I had a father who believed in dangerous toys, and so he was always giving us blowguns or shotguns or machetes. You know what I mean? Lawn darts.
I knew your dad. I knew your dad.
Yeah, great man. So, excessive risk is obviously unwise, but life entails some level of risk, and telling people that, they should never expose themselves to any is like telling them that they can be immortal, which is a lie. I mean, it's not a question of, is it going to end? Yeah, it's going to end. The question is, how do you live? And being in fear all the time it's a bad thing.
No. In the long slide toward permanent recriminations against those with whom you disagree in today's society. I mean, you and I kind of came of age in media when you could debate other people. I mean, you debated and it was, but now it's, you're a horrible, awful, rotten, racist person who wants everyone to get COVID unless you believe in vaccine mandates for everyone. That's how it is today. Your comment on that, just that aspect.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, I just had to reread 30 years of magazine pieces I had written and I had a contract with Simon & Schuster to do this book at exactly the moment they were canceling Josh Hawley's book because he cast a vote they didn't like, which had a lot of precedent in previous elections. And I just thought this crystallizes the change. So book publishers stood up for people's freedom of speech for generations. And now Jonathan Karp, who runs Simon & Schuster, and I read all about this in the book, published by Simon & Schuster, is openly defending censorship because the Democratic Party has demanded it. And I thought that really is, that's the moment distilled right there. A publisher pushing censorship. It just blows my mind.
And Tucker, I want to get to some other stories that speak of some of the erosion of our basic freedoms. In the United States, we haven't seen yet the type of kind of brutal enforcement of kind of a medical dictatorship that you're beginning to see in France. And in France, police are now going table to table to these outdoor restaurants, checking for people's health passes. I think you and I were mocked last year for saying that this was what the left ultimately wanted to have happen here.
Right.
Do you agree that that's ultimately what they would prefer to happen here?
Well, of course. I mean, of course. But I mean, you wonder, why would it stop with COVID? I mean, why not HIV patients or people with hepatitis or any transmissible disease? I mean, right, there's a principle here, which is that your health status has to remain private. The government doesn't have a right to force you to take medicine you don't want or need, and that you have a right to keep private, your own health condition. And when we give that up, I mean, you're looking at a brand new country. And the French are fighting back against it, as you know. I don't think their testosterone levels have been lowered to quite the levels of ours by bad food or whatever, but they are definitely, huge numbers of people are pushing back against this in the form of protest nationwide in France. You're not seeing that here. You wonder how far they can go before people say, I'm not against vaccines. I obviously want to get COVID under control, but you can't force me to take a medicine I don't want. If you can do that, why can't you sterilize me or lobotomy? What can't you do to me if you own my body? That's a totally fair question. Why is no one asking it?
Liberals used to believe in all that. And I guess it all depends. Tucker, congrats on the book, The Long Slide, Destined for Number One-dom. And I'm glad you're back. You're not announcing a change of residency to Hungary, right? You're actually here for a while.
Are you kidding? I'm okay. Incorrigibly American, but thank you.
All right, great to see you. Congrats, Tucker. Everyone out and go to tuckercarlson.com. You can buy a copy of the book and even order a signed copy by Tucker himself. And coming up, why are prominent doctors downplaying natural immunity? We're going to explore this for every 100,000 people. Iceland, though, is right behind us at 29. The Director General of Iceland's Ministry of Health telling Reuters, since July 9th, 77% of domestic infections were among vaccinated individuals. It's the kind of data that should have every doctor in the country screaming about natural immunity, but instead, well, we get this.
If previous infection does confer some degree of immunity, certainly, the big question is it as good as having been vaccinated, and is it as durable? And I think almost all the evidence at this point is very clear that having been previously infected is not going to give you the same level of protection as being fully vaccinated. So
Okay, that is false. Here now is Dr. Peter McCullough, internist cardiologist and epidemiologist. Dr. McCullough, okay, first of all, is he correct in what he just said about the natural immunity?
I respectfully disagree, and I think most Americans would as well. We know that COVID-19 is one and done, that natural immunity is robust, complete, and durable. And, up until May 1st, the CDC had reported 10,000 vaccine failures, fully 10,000 of them. 9% were hospitalized, 3% died. During that time period, the CDC did not record a single failure of natural immunity.
Well, one of the health ministers in Iceland basically said in response to this data that, at this point, everyone's just going to have to get exposed to the virus through natural immunity to herd immunity. So that's what they seem to be coming to. Not that they're anti-vaccine, they're not at all, but it only can go so far.
Well, Iceland has 330,000 people, and they've done a terrific job with treatment. They've only had 30 deaths. But you're right, the explosion of cases they've seen in the last few weeks has